A 22-minute game about an Englishman feeling sorry for himself, getting drunk, and feeling more sorry for himself. I paid $1 to hear a man monologue about nothing. I expected nothing when I bought this on sale, and I'm still disappointed that I bought it. This game gave me brain rot. Within a lengthy negative review, one user writes, "I felt unsafe, unclean, and grateful that Maiko never turned up to this unsettling evening." Most of the hate towards this game is gameplay related, and fair enough. Even calling this a game is a bit of a stretch. However, reading through reviews, you'll notice much of the negative feedback is directed at our protagonist, Julian Luxemburg. Some believe he's too weak-willed and too sensitive to the world around him. Others believe he might not be sensitive enough. He's unfeeling and only cares about himself. I first found this game when I was 13, watching a YouTuber named Cry before, I was both confused and curious about it. This was likely the first indie game I had seen, and I could tell I was watching something different. There was a point to it, but I couldn't understand what it was. Not only because I was so young, but also because my English just wasn't very good. A couple weeks ago, by pure chance, I found this game on the Steam store, and I knew I had to give it a try. So let's try to find out why people hate Julian.
Talking. That is how the Japanese call a clock. I'm quite sure she taught me that. It's a curious thing to do. Most foreigners just teach you how to count.
Julian Luxemburg has a date tonight with a Japanese girl named Maiko, a date which was arranged by his friend Jerry. In his candlelit kitchen, he sits at a table set for two, the seat across from him empty. She's late, very late. As the clock ticks on, we take control of Julian's subconscious, things like stretching, sipping wine, smoking, while his thoughts flow freely, exposing to us his mental framework, things like his banal worries about his job, and deeper worries concerning his life and his very identity.
It's getting quite late to show up. Nobody would show up this late on meetings. 10 minutes. Might have just missed a bus, of course.
This internal struggle is something we'll see multiple times over. Julian will realize that it's getting later and later, but then think of a justification, a rationalization as to why Maiko will show up. Or he'll just behave as if she will show up, and then subsequently think of a reason as to why she won't. Either way, he's left waiting, as the clock on the wall loudly ticks on and frames every moment of the game. And it's this waiting by himself that will cause a sort of spiral of introspection. Julian seems to have trouble committing to a position. He neither fully accepts that she won't come, nor rests in the certainty that she will. Instead, he's always in a sort of limbo. And I suspect this inability to make a choice about something as simple as waiting for a date will mirror a deeper struggle within himself.
Yes, lovely Maiko. Pretty eyes. Very elegant. The Japanese always know how to dress, that's a given. Oh, shit, what if she doesn't show up? It's been 10 minutes.
Julian romanticizes Maiko, but his perception of her is somewhat vague and idealized. He rarely, if ever, mentions concrete details or any meaningful interactions the two have had. Instead, he mentions abstract pleasantries, which might be more like projections of his own fantasies than descriptions of a real person. His comment on her elegance, for example, feels less like an observation about Maiko and more like a projection of a romantic idea of how well a Japanese person might dress. I'm not even saying that that idea doesn't have any basis. Personally, I also think Japanese people dress themselves very well. But my point is, we never get to truly know Maiko. Only this very romanticized idea that lives within Julian's mind. After some very mundane complaints about his job, Julian says, or I guess thinks,
This was the only chance I had as well. Never meeting people like that. Jerry was right, I should be happy at least he is looking out for my sex life. Which is a bit crude.
Here's something to maybe keep in mind when listening to Julian's thoughts. Now, I've talked about Freud's theory of the id, ego, and superego many times on this channel. However, I find that here it's especially fitting since we are quite literally listening to his inner monologue, his internal process which no one else is meant to hear. So, for those who are not aware of this Freudian concept, the id is essentially the instinctual, desire, and pleasure-driven segment of someone's psyche. Then the superego is the judging internal voice of societal rules, and is continually in conflict with the id. And it's this conflict which births a person's active ego. I personally like to view it positionally, where you have the id at the bottom, sort of rising up those base instincts of desire and instant gratification, and the superego at the top, hammering down on the id, to some extent suppressing it a bit to form a person's more pro-social, active ego. Julian, at this point, while sober, seems to be a somewhat neurotic person, more so controlled by his superego, finding Jerry's comment about his sex life very crude, even though we will hear much more crude things emerge in Julian's own thoughts later on. He then decides to have a cup of wine to calm his nerves.
Okay, I have to calm my nerves. I'd better just take a sip of wine. Yeah, go on then. It will stop me from thinking so much.
He decides to have a glass of wine to stop himself from thinking so much, something which might hint at a deeper psychological pattern. You'll notice that Julian's inner monologue is quite incessant, and he regularly spirals in his thoughts. Here he uses the wine as a way to sort of drown the noise of his own thoughts, to escape the discomfort of introspection, to not have to think. And Julian, I don't think, is a stranger to this act. You'll see it's something he does regularly, whether through alcohol or other forms of distraction. Ironically though, it's this very same need to drown out introspection that tends to cause a more chaotic inner life. As you don't allow yourself to solve your little psychological puzzles, if you will, more and more will mount up.
I feel a bit bad about starting to eat. Can't just drink wine though. Will it look odd? I'll just pretend I didn't when the door rings. Should be time enough. I'll just go, just a minute. Just a minute.
These are the small little moments I find incredibly relatable, in a kind of cringy way, I guess. Hearing Julian meticulously plan how he'll appear, down to the smallest detail, is something we rarely admit to, but we all do, at least to some extent. That little rehearsal he does of how the interaction will go down is deep down an attempt to control, or at least shape how you are perceived by others. It's almost a necessary part of life. Do it too much though, and it can point to deeper insecurities about your self-image. And I suspect Julian holds himself to a fairly high standard when it comes to his self-image. He's already planning to pretend he wasn't eating when Maiko arrives, as if he was just casually waiting or doing something else important. Completely at ease, not completely panicking and pulling his hairs out of his head because she might not show up. No, of course not. Even though she is very late, everything is still going according to his romantic plan. He won't admit, or at least not out loud, that he's afraid she's left him alone. That would mean acknowledging some vulnerability. That would mean admitting, most importantly to himself, that he's not totally in control. And yes, I do mean to himself. I think that his reluctance to eat alone at this table that he set for two sort of shows this. He doesn't just dislike the feeling of loneliness, he actively rejects it. There are many reasons why someone might hide their loneliness, but Julian also hides it from himself, because it doesn't fit into the curated image that he has made for himself.
I don't know, just eating bread by myself here. If I had just let it be dancing with the guys at Maiko, I would have been sure she'd see me. Yeah, Jerry is always right.
We then get to hear him moan about his job a little more.
And what does Johnson do these days? Just sits at his desk fiddling his iPhone and having trivial conversations with the clients I get for him. Oh yes, he does all the lunches. It's a business expense.
But the next thought is a little more interesting.
Oh, they are right, aren't they? I just don't seem to care. Here's a pretty girl coming over for the first time in God knows how long a time.
He has a deeply personal thought there for a moment that clearly underlines his feelings of loneliness. But before dwelling on it for too long, he does a hard pivot to quote the British romantic poet Lord Byron.
What did Byron write? She turned upon a pillow, pill she lay, her dark eyes flashing through her tears like something.
Many, including Julian himself, might believe that by bringing up a romantic writer like Byron, after that glimpse of vulnerability, is a sign of deep introspection, that he's dealing with his loneliness honestly. But I disagree. I believe he's using it as a sort of crutch, as a defense mechanism so that he doesn't have to deal with the uncomfortable truth of his loneliness. What does Byron's Parisina, which is the poem Julian is trying to quote, have to do with Julian's loneliness? It's a massive melodramatic poem about an incestuous affair. It's as if he's trying to wrap and decorate his moment of vulnerability, to romanticize it with something grand, romantic, and intellectual, so that he doesn't actually have to feel anything.
When will I read poetry to someone anyway? Well, probably would be wasted on Maiko. Nothing under 120 BPM can please her. Wouldn't mind giving her something over 120 BPM. That was really bad.
Julian then sort of dismisses that whole romantic literary angle because, according to him, Maiko is just too modern. She wouldn't care for his poetry, which of course begs the question of why he wants to be with her in the first place, since from what little we know about the two, they seem quite different from each other. Perhaps we'll get an answer later. Then comes that little 120 BPM joke. It feels like his id slipping out, and it kind of breaks the poetic air Julian was trying to form just a few seconds ago. But he immediately tries to take it back, chuckling and thinking, that was really bad. That then feels like his superego stepping in, that internalized voice of shame and self-regulation. Some people will see things like this and find Julian reprehensible or off-putting in some way. But I disagree. These are the kind of things that make him relatable. Anyone who claims they don't occasionally have crude, inappropriate, or even downright offensive thoughts is either lying to you, or worse, lying to themselves.
I do want sex with her though.
After some more work-related shenanigans,
Let them go down the drain. Marianne probably couldn't even file for bankruptcy.
he then sort of accepts that Maiko isn't coming.
Yeah. What am I worrying about anyway? Maiko's not showing up, so what? I'll just spend the night doing something useful. Something useful.
He decides to move on to the soup and have another glass of wine.
I'll just move on to the soup. I'm not that hungry anymore. I really just want to go do something now. Could have another glass. Yeah, I could have that.
He then revels in the smell of la soup.
That does smell good. Yeah, Maiko has no idea what she's missing. She's probably just dancing God knows what now. It's almost 8.
There's something kind of sad about seeing Julian try to grasp out a small win with this soup. Like she's the one missing out on great food and great company, on something real and valuable, unlike whatever shallow and vapid scene she might or might not be enjoying instead. Even though if she saw those things and truly saw them as valuable, if she valued him over whatever she is doing right now, she would have shown up. He's really just trying to protect himself from the fact that being stood up like this really hurts him. It's really a form of self-soothing, and then that self-soothing continues in another form.
Probably we'll take the bike to work tomorrow. Can go to the countryside afterwards. Take the highway through that. That is rather good. Might go to a restaurant on the way back. Italian. Take a book with me. Then I'll be sitting there alone, reading a book.
He makes a little fantasy for himself, one where he isn't the guy who got stood up yesterday, but a sort of charming, romantic loner. Of course, there's nothing inherently wrong with spending time alone, or even building an aesthetic fantasy for yourself. I would even say that Julian might need something like that to some extent. He certainly has enough distractions for himself. It's more so the fact that he has to imagine this after such a big disappointment. It makes it feel more like a crafted story to cope with his circumstances, rather than an organic and positive envisionment of his life. Bro, it's just character development. It's like he's planning to perform an act for an invisible audience, or for himself.
Maiko dancing, that was rather nice. How do I always get along with those guys? They always call me. Should probably try to reach me. Or they would.
And we see directly afterwards that he's still to some extent holding on to the idea that he isn't being stood up.
Yeah, I'm just pumping myself up here. The soup might be nice, and I have a bike, a paycheck that'll soon buy me a way out of this house. I'm not too bad looking. But I don't really use it that much. Biking and reading doesn't really get you into touch with the other sex.
The way Julian rattles off his assets, the bike, his job, his looks, feels like yet another form of self-soothing, a way to reassert his own worth in the face of rejection. It can get a little confusing how he swings so greatly between acceptance and denial. One moment he accepts that he's been stood up, the next he speaks, or thinks, as if she will show up. It's almost as if he's placed such importance on her showing up that if she doesn't, his self-image will suffer greatly.
They are right, really. I should just go out with them, instead of quoting Byron to myself. Get a few drinks down, dance with someone, pull a girl, pull a chick. Pull a chick.
the pull a chick line sounds very unnatural coming from him. There's discomfort there, as if he's trying on a persona that doesn't quite fit. It's as if he's attempting to sound more like his friends and less like himself. It's not really Julian's voice, it's the voice of someone he thinks he should be, to be accepted, to not be alone.
I can't believe Michael didn't show up. I was so hoping to. And she seemed to like me. Did she? I can never tell. After a few drinks, everybody kisses anybody anyway. Who else did she kiss? Not Jerry, I think. She might think we all look the same, but would she kiss Jerry?
And then Julian's defenses seem to begin to fall apart. The thought of Maiko not showing up is no longer just an hypothetical or a possibility. It's a certainty. His earlier rationalizations and romanticizations, is that a word? Have been stripped away, and we can see his id rising up to show that he is angry. He is frustrated with all this. Then we get that flippant, bitter, after a few drinks, everybody kisses anybody anyway. Who else did she kiss? Here we see Julian's mind reach for something, anything, to pin the blame of this hurt. A classic case of emotional displacement, redirecting that pain of rejection into jealousy or even resentment, because those feelings are much easier to sit with. We of course can't deny the possibility of projection as well. Perhaps Julian is the one who, after only a few drinks, will kiss anybody. He does seem lonely enough to do it.
When was she going back? A few months. Not much time left if I want to shag her. Is that all it is now? Shagging. That is exactly what Jerry's talking about. All that thinking. I should just let go.
This crude comment seems to come out of nowhere. It's almost as if he's trying to shock himself, to shake off the emotional burden, trying to reduce it to something much more simple, for lack of a better word. If he can make it just about something as base and primal as sex, maybe it won't hurt. You won't have to sit with the painful thought of wanting something more. And I say this because the next line, "Is that all it is now, shagging?" I think reveals that he is lying to himself, and he knows it. It has that same tone as the pulling a chick comment. It comes off as a performance, which, like I said before, seems to be becoming less effective. Anyway, this all seems to be making him very uncomfortable, so he has another glass of wine.
When am I going to have a good relationship again? I thought that might be possible with Maiko. I'm not saying the one, just, you know. Not just a shagging, just someone to hold.
Now, which one is the real Julian? The brash, self-centered, and unfeeling Julian who's just looking for a shagging, or the lonely Julian who desperately wants someone to hold, to be connected to others? It seems as if, even with his friends, he has to play the part of someone else. So, where does that leave Julian? Now, both versions are part of him, of course. The crude Julian and the romantic Julian, let's call them, they coexist within him. But in Jungian terms, the first one feels closer to his persona, a social mask crafted to impress, or more so in his case, to fit in. While the second one, the one who quietly longs for connection, seems to bear more characteristics of his Jungian shadow, is more hidden, more repressed self he might refuse to let out. It's not as polished, but in turn, less fake. And in that moment, stripped of performances, we get, I believe, the real Julian. After this, he goes for a smoke and tries to bring back his persona, but it just doesn't work.
Yeah, hammer wuss. God knows I'm not meeting anyone biking or sitting in the office. Yeah, Marianne. She's quite good looking. Shag-worthy, I suppose. Just... not sure.
Julian goes for a smoke and almost instinctually starts thinking about another woman, Marianne, thinking about whether she might be shag-worthy. It's as if he's trying to kind of jumpstart his self-worth through meaningless desire again, trying to distract himself with some form of lust, and once again attempting to quote Byron, like a broken loop of his previous performances. But then something cracks.
She ceased and turned upon a pillar peel, her dark curls shading her one cheek. That's different, isn't it? I can never remember this poem. Damn! I can't stand she didn't show up. So much depended on it, didn't it?
This outburst is probably the most honest thing Julian's thought all night. In that moment, we see how much he has elevated the importance of this one date. It's so destructive how he treats this single date as some sort of existential test. All of this whole time, was never about Maiko. She was just an accessory to this pathetic test, about proving to himself that he's still lovable, still desirable, still capable of not being alone. But of course, that kind of emotional weight just isn't sustainable. No one date, no one person can bear that much meaning forced upon them. I think I understand the hatred people have for Julian, because if I'm being honest, I kinda hate him myself. But that hatred, it doesn't just come from some sort of moral outrage about how crass he is, or how self-centered he is. I think we see parts of ourselves in Julian, that annoying neediness, the self-deception to protect himself, the desperate attempts to control others in how they perceive us. It is pathetic, it is self-destructive, but it's also painfully human. And that's what makes him so hard to listen to. Not because we are so much better than him, but because he's unfortunately very familiar. We judge him, or in some cases even mock him, but maybe it's because we're just as terrified of having to sit alone at our kitchen table, wondering if anyone is still coming. Don't pretend you don't put on a video or a podcast while you eat just to avoid sitting alone with your own thoughts. And be honest, how many of those thoughts are even pleasant? How many of those thoughts would your friends, girlfriends, boyfriends find acceptable? Eventually there's a knock on the door, and Julian thinks it's Maiko, but it's actually just a neighbor. He decides to leave, to go find his friends, to drown out this disappointing evening with noise, lights, more alcohol, and company. Company that most likely won't ask too many questions. It's quite clearly an escape. I guess the silence got too loud for him.
Oh my. Ah, Freeman, I've got to get out of here. You, with the briefcase, you've got to help me out of here. I'm sorry. Can we do this again? Can you read my name tag?